Hello and welcome to my channel. Bonsoir et bienvenue sur ma chaîne. My name is Muriel and this evening I'm going to do what I'm going to call a casual review of none other than The Lord of the Rings and the Silmarillion by J.R.R. Tolkien. So I say casual because, let's be real here, who of you who even click on this video don't actually know what The Lord of the Rings is about, right? So I'm not gonna do my traditional review structure. This is more going to be like an informal discussion about what I thought of my reading experience of this huge classic of fantasy literature. For the Silmarillion, though, perhaps a wee bit of an explanation is necessary. Like I mentioned in my 27 years of reading video, I actually read this before I read The Lord of the Rings because, well, I saw the movies by Peter Jackson and I felt like I didn't really need to read the books. My dad, who's a huge Lord of the Rings fan, thought it was a brilliant adaptation, so I felt like, I'm good. But I was interested in the Tolkienverse and in the lore, so I felt like this would be a good fix for that. Indeed it was. I love the Silmarillion. I read this 2, 3, 4 years ago, something like that, I can't remember now, but I decided since I was in fact going to read The Lord of the Rings this year, that I was going to first reread the Silmarillion to have all the background lore in mind. I didn't reread The Hobbit though, but I read The Hobbit in French when I was a kid, and then I reread it in English not that long ago either, so I felt like, no, I'm good with that. I'm gonna hop straight from this to The Lord of the Rings. And then I read Unfinished Tales as well, but I'm not really gonna go into that. That's just additional lore and information. I also read The Children of Hurin, which is present in the Silmarillion, but then Christopher Tolkien came out with like a more polished, finished version, also in a beautiful illustrated edition. Again, I'm not really going to go into that. Suffice it to say that the Greek tragedists of ancient times had nothing on Tolkien, because holy crap, The Children of Hurin is like a tragedy with a capital T. It's so sad. It's so sad what happens in that book. I have not read Beren and Luthien or The Fall of Gondolin. I was interested, but then I learned it's not like The Children of Hurin. It's like a collection of the preparatory notes and like the early versions, unfinished versions of those tales that are present in the Silmarillion by J.R.R. Tolkien. So it's not like a finished narrative like The Children of Hurin is. I'm not enough of a Tolkien nerd, I guess, to get into that for now. They are also illustrated, and I'm like, oh, yeah, but don't I want these editions in my library just because? I don't know. For now, I'm holding off, but perhaps I'll change my mind in the future. But so I haven't read those. So, the Silmarillion, for those of you who are familiar with The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbits, if only because of the movies, the Silmarillion is like the mythology proper of the Tolkienverse, and also it's about the elves, basically, in Middle-earth. It's about the age of the elves. The Lord of the Rings is about the coming age of man, while the Silmarillion is about the age of the elves, the golden age of the elves, their rise and slow downfall. It's also about a little bit. It mentions the Númenóreans, and it mentions the mythology, the creation of Arda, which is the world of Tolkien, and the gods, or the demiurges, I guess you should call them. So middle gods, like you have the creator spirit, and then you have these gods that organize creation, and in theology and mythology they're called demiurges. And then the original OG big bad, before Sauron there was Morgoth, who was 10,000 times worse than Sauron ever was. So that's kind of funny. And so it's all about that. I can understand why some people find this dense and dry, because it's very descriptive. You don't really find yourself in the heads of the characters. It's less a story of a particular moment in time, like The Lord of the Rings is, or The Hobbit is, even more actually. It's almost like a history book in a way. A history about Middle-earth and the elves. But I knew this going in, and that's kind of what I wanted. I wanted lore. I wanted world building, and I got it in spades, and I loved it. So that's for context. So, I'm not really going to go into the particulars of the story of The Lord of the Rings. I'm just going to assume that you're somewhat familiar with the basic premise, and I've already kind of described the general idea of the Silmarillion. So I'm gonna just be a bit more informal, casual about this. I will talk about the writing style. So, while this worked for me with the Silmarillion, it didn't work for me as much with The Lord of the Rings. As I've already mentioned across a couple of videos here and there, I was disappointed in The Lord of the Rings. And dare I say it, I preferred the movies. I don't think it's better than the books. Don't get me wrong, that's not what I said. I preferred them to the books. I enjoyed them more. And this is both because I had issues with the way the story was written or presented, and also because, as I mentioned, and I'm not going to go into it, but I read this as a very, very bad time in my life. I had started reading The Fellowship of the Ring, then this thing happened. I didn't read for like a month because I was just in a very, very, very bad place. And then I was like, you know what, I gotta move on somehow. I have to live, right? So slowly I picked it back up and I did finish it, but the experience is just fundamentally tainted by that, so it colours my judgment of it as well. So, the writing, which worked for me in the Silmarillion, but not so much in The Lord of the Rings. It's hard to explain, but I feel like the writing style is very, and too much, mythical. There's something very, well, obviously epic, it's heroic fantasy, right? There's something too mythic, too legendary about it. Almost it's like there's this shroud of mythical fog surrounding it, almost like I'm reading mythology. So this kind of works for the Silmarillion, because that's what I was expecting. Mythology about the Tolkienverse. History, mythic history about the Tolkienverse over 2,000 years. But for the story of The Lord of the Rings, where you're supposed to be with the characters and their struggles and this great battle between good and evil, I felt like it put too much distance between me and the characters and the narrative. There was this opaque wall of mist, of distance, of mythicalness, I want to call it, that just didn't work for me. Weirdly enough, I also had this a wee bit when I reread The Earthsea Cycle by Ursula K. Le Guin. In any case, while this put distance between me and the characters and the story as it was unfolding, it does also kind of work in the sense that it is a story about an epic conflict between good and evil. You do feel almost like you're reading about mythical Earth history, like something that happened thousands of years ago. So if you take it that way, I guess it does work. Like I said, it works for the Silmarillion because that's what I was expecting from the Silmarillion, but it's not what I was expecting from The Lord of the Rings, and so I was taken aback a bit and a bit disappointed because of it, which wasn't the case at all for me in the movies, where, I mean, I cried at the end of the movies. It's very emotional, all the characters, and it works brilliantly there. That being said, it's very well written as well. I don't want to give the impression that it's badly written. It's just the way it's written, the tone of it just establishes a too great distance between the reader and the book, in my opinion. But it's very beautiful as well. This mythic aspect makes it quite flowing and elegant and beautiful. And there are beautiful descriptions that I will give Tolkien. He describes his invented, created universe beautifully, realistically. Ironically, while I felt there was too much distance between me and the story and the characters, at the same time I could really picture and imagine Middle-earth. Like he invents flower species and he describes them, the colours, the light, or the landscapes in the Silmarillion. I mean, there's a lot of different landscapes in the land, the sunken land by the time of the Lord of the Rings of Beleriand, with the cliffs and the rivers and the gorges and the forest. It's magnificent. And that just helps to establish the strength of his world building. All credit goes to him for that. His world building is truly magnificent. And I guess that's ultimately what I prefer in Tolkien. Not so much the stories themselves, the narratives with the characters, but the world building. The way he creates this completely imagined universe establishes, like I said, the peoples, the genealogies, the migrations, the maps, the lands, the landscapes, the flowers, the ecology, the deities, the creation myth, the history. It's masterful. I mean, that's a true work of creative genius, of art. In that sense, yeah, I love Tolkien for that. It's rare to find it to that degree. I think, personally, A Song of Ice and Fire gets into that level as well. don't get me wrong though, his story's not bad either. The Lord of the Rings is not a bad story by any means. It's just, that's not what I love him for. I mean, it's the story of a conflict between good and evil, right? Essentially, that's what it boils down to, and the story of prophecy and the changing of ages as well. I'll get back to it when I talk about some of the themes and what I've read from Tolkien. In the Silmarillion, I mean, there's also this big conflict between good and evil, which ultimately, continues through the Numenorean age and then the Second Age. Well, Numenor is the Second Age, sorry. Through the Second Age and then the Third Age with the Lord of the Rings. So yeah, but then it's also the story about the rise and fall of the people, the elves, and great migrations of people from Middle-earth to Valinor, then back to Beleriand. So yeah, it's a bit different. Lord of the Rings is really, in a sense, this epic conflict between good and evil, and establishing the victory and the triumph of good and order versus evil and chaos. It's a story that does work. It's a pretty simple story overall, and I am also overly simplifying it, to be fair. I'm not doing Tolkien justice there, but I mean, come on, that's kind of it though. I think there are more complex, more layered stories out there, is what I'm really trying to say. And another thing that disappointed me though, to be fair, that I was somewhat expecting from The Lord of the Rings, it is a bit of a sausage fest. Okay, let's be real here. 90% of the characters are men, which doesn't necessarily make it bad either. I mean, if the male characters are great and I can relate to them, it's all good for me, but okay, come on, let's be real. There aren't many female characters in this. The couple there are pretty badass, though. I will give him credit for that. Like, Galadriel is probably actually the most badass female character in the entire Tolkien legendarium. The woman is like, what, 2,500 years old or something? She's like one of the oldest characters in the story by the time of the Lord of the Rings. And then you have Eowyn. She slays the freaking king of the Nazgul. Like, props to her, respect. So that was nice. The female warrior. So he's not actively trashing women or being overly misogynistic. He just kind of ignores the women. You know, their worst literary sins than that, to be fair. It's just, yeah. Because, I mean, Arwen does nothing in the books. That's the thing, the movies changed a bit. They do make her a bit more badass, a bit more active in the movies. Like, when she stops the Nazgul from crossing the river close to Rivendell. That's not in the books. In the books, that's done by one of her brothers. She's nowhere to be seen. She's just Aragorn's love interest. That's it. Now, what I will say, though, is that one thing I really enjoyed are the male friendships. And the concept of friendship itself, which I think is pretty central to the story. There are lovely, truly strong, loving, supporting relationships between the male characters. You've got the great friendship between Gimli and Legolas. A cross-racial friendship, I guess you could call it. That's really great. And the hobbits. Oh, the hobbits. You gotta love the hobbits, though. They warm your heart, don't they? They're just lovely little folk, and they're good little country folk. They like their little houses and their little gardens, and they walk barefoot everywhere, and they're all about peace, and they don't want conflict. And yeah, they're a bit simple, and they're not adventurous, they're not that curious about the world, but they're just happy, relaxed people. And that's just lovely, you know? We need more of that in the world, I think. Perhaps not the lack of curiosity and, like, low-key ignorance, but the being nice and being peaceful and being kind and amicable towards your neighbors and your fellow, well, for us it would be humans, for them it's hobbits, so that was nice. But then, again, I think there is a bit of a lack of characterization in some of the male protagonists. Like Aragorn, see, I don't get what the fuss is about him. Yeah, he's the promised king. Whoopie-doo. He's like, perfect. He gets tempted by one of Palantir at some point, and that's about it. Like, that's his trial. He's boring. Yeah. You know what? I said it. Aragorn is bloody boring as a character. He's perfect. He's near to flawless. He's the long-awaited king. He's humble, but he's brave. He's chivalrous, and he's intelligent, and he's a good leader, but he doesn't want to be overbearing. Like, okay, yeah, we get it. You're the golden boy. Move along. See, Boromir, in a certain respect, is more interesting as a character because there's a genuine inner struggle in him. He is tempted by evil and he succumbs to the temptation, but then he regrets it and he's full of shame and regret. And you can see that beyond his succumbing to temptation, he's actually a good man. He just made a terrible mistake. That was really touching. Gandalf is an interesting character, I guess. But see, ultimately, he's a deity. If you didn't know, like, the wizards in Middle-earth are actually, like, incarnated lesser gods. So while he also is flawed, he's very wise, he's the wise old sorcerer. I really like that archetype, actually. I mean, it's an archetype that's probably overused in fantasy, but I actually enjoy it. But even he has certain flaws, because, I mean, actually the gods can be corrupted. I mean, Sauron, if you didn't know, is also a god, basically. A lesser god. And Morgoth, the OG big bad, was also a deity that turned bad, that just didn't want to work in concert with the other demiurges to create a harmonious world. It was like, no, I want to do my own thing. I don't want to follow the instructions of the creative force, Eru Iluvatar, or however you pronounce that. No, I want to do my own thing. I want to stir some shit up. So the gods can be corrupted. Gandalf does have flaws, and I mean, well, Saruman is also a wizard, and he's also a deity, technically an incarnated deity, and he certainly turns over to evil, so they're not black and white characters. Apart from Aragorn. Like I said, Aragorn is the most boring character in the story, by far, in my opinion. Now, in the Silmarillion, there are a crap ton of characters. Like, thank goodness Tolkien was such a diligent world builder and note taker, because genealogies are provided, and you have charts for how the elves, because the elves, the different types of elves, different tribes, sub-races of elves, I don't know what you're supposed to call them. So to keep track of who went where, there are lines of descent and of migration, thank goodness for that. There's a lot of characters, but it's about the great families of the elves from Valinor, who became amazing jewelsmiths and metalsmiths and great creators of beautiful things and magical things. And they created these Silmarils, like the precursors of the rings in a way. These Silmarils which captured the starlight of creation, something like that. And they were stolen by the big bad, Morgoth, who got greedy and like, ooh, I want them shiny things. And then the king of Noldor, was that the elves? Yeah, I think so. Was like, yo, where are my jewels at? And he's like, I'm gonna seek vengeance. And the gods tell him, so the elves live in Valinor with the gods, and the gods tell him, dude, calm down. You pursue that line of thought and of action, and bad things are gonna happen to you, and you'll be cursed, and it's gonna be shit, basically. But no, he's stubborn, he's greedy, he wants his jewels back, his Silmarils that he labored long and hard to create. And that's the beginning of basically the fall of the elves, of them going back to Middle-earth, Beleriand specifically, and trying to get these jewels back. But then they establish their kingdoms throughout Beleriand, and their civilizations also flourish at the same time, but there are these mounting conflicts and wars over 1,000 years with Morgoth, and in the end there's this ginormous cataclysm that shatters the land of Middle-earth, and Beleriand gets sunken beneath the ocean. But then you have the first humans who awaken in the meantime, and they get there, and those who ally with the elves and who are faithful to the elves and to the gods of Valinor, they get rewarded with Numenor. That's where Numenor comes from. So, yeah, there's lots of characters. And you get a general sense of who is this way and who is that way. And you do get Galadriel, you do get Elrond towards the end. You get a sense of who they are as people, but it's such a mythic, epic narrative of huge proportions. You never really get intimate with any one character, except perhaps, well, you have the Children of Hurin narrative and you have the Beren and Luthien narrative. You do get with Beren and Luthien for quite a few chapters in the Silmarillion. And there, I guess, you do get a sense of who they are as people. And Beren was interesting, and Luthien as well. And see, Aragorn and Arwen are actually supposed to be direct descendants of theirs, and their love story is supposed to mirror the epic love story of Beren and Luthien. But again, like I said, Aragorn was boring to me, and Arwen is like, item. But to come back to the Hobbits, for example, and, well, the Fellowship of the Ring itself. Like I said, friendship, fellowship, loyalty are very, I think, important elements in the stories of Tolkien, specifically the Lord of the Rings. I want to say there's like the inverse of toxic masculinity in the Lord of the Rings. I feel like they're great examples of very positive masculine relationships and masculine identities. I don't even really like to use those words, but yeah, in a way it's like great role models for how men should act or types of behaviors men should aspire to, because the hobbits, the fast friends of Merry, Pippin, Frodo, and Sam, you know, they actually say they love each other. There's something beautiful about their friendship. And the hobbits, you know, they're very touchy-feely people. They hug each other, they touch each other, they're very hands-on, but in a positive way, very affectionate, just very warm people. And that applies to the men as well. There's no undercurrent of creepiness or sexualization. I feel like that's a good model of male-to-male relationships. Like, there's no concerns about, oh, am I being gay, or am I being too feminine or girly? Like, no, man, you're my friend, you're like my brother in spirit, I love you. And I can tell you that without that menacing my masculinity. I don't know, I thought that's a really nice thing about Tolkien, actually, and The Lord of the Rings in particular. I think friendship is one of the central themes of The Lord of the Rings. Like, yeah, there's the conflict between good and evil, order versus chaos, and just making the forces of light triumph over the forces of darkness, right? Yeah, sure. Friendship, fellowship, I mean, it's in the title of the bloody first part of the book. Loyalty, just upholding these good, cooperative human qualities. I mean, of course, the epic friendship between Bilbo and Samwise Gamgee, like, that's magnificent. Like, who wouldn't want to have that kind of friendship in their lives, right? Or, you know, even Legolas and Gimli, you know, this cross-racial, if you want to call it, friendship. Like, at the end, you know, Legolas says, oh, Gimli, you know, if we make it through this, please let me take you through Fangorn Forest, because as an elf I can really appreciate the trees, and let me show you the beauty of the forests and the trees, because Gimli is very uncomfortable in there, but he's like, you know, mate, alright, but in exchange, if we get through this, you, my elf friend, I will take you through the caves at Helm's Deep, because those caves are amazing. As a dwarf, I can appreciate the underground beauty of the stalactites and the stalagmites and the rock formations. And Legolas says yes, and that happens, you know, like the end chapter where it's like an epilogue, they do that. And there's something really nice about that as well. The friendship with the capital F, the love that is true friendship, is really central, I think, to The Lord of the Rings. I guess a secondary theme you could mention, which is also a hallmark of fantasy and heroic fantasies, you know, the concept of fate and destiny, and a lot of these things were like set up over centuries and millennia of history, like this was going to happen, and Aragorn obviously is the promised king, etc., etc. In the Silmarillion, I mean, I think there are additional themes. I mean, like I said, it's the loss of a golden age. It's the rise and fall of a civilization, of a world. I mean, quite literally, Beleriand disappears, wiped off the face of the map. It's the fall of the elves and the emergence of the human race. There's also a discussion about, there's the gift and the burden of free will, and there are gods to guide the elves, but ultimately the elves can decide, you know what, we're going to do what we bloody well please. We're going to go over to Beleriand and we're going to get those Silmarils back. There's also the gift of mortality, which is exclusive to humans. So that's an interesting concept in Tolkien's work, in Tolkien's universe. The creative spirit, Eru Ilúvatar, created the race of elves and the race of human beings. And to the elves, he decreed, you will live within Arda, the earth, basically, in the Tolkienverse, for as long as it lasts, and you will be given great gifts of wisdom, of knowledge, of intimacy with the natural world, with great architectural skills, jewel-smithing skills, etc., etc., but you will be bound to this world. To human beings, I will give this gift, the gift of mortality. Interesting concept, that mortality, the fact that human beings die, is actually a gift given to them by the supreme creator deity. You will not be as great as the elves and all these crafts and all these skills, but you will be able to leave this plane of existence once your body dies and decays. Your spirit will go who knows where. That's never answered, obviously. Don't know if there is a heaven, a hell, or just an other world. But you will leave this earth and you will not be bound to its sorrows and travails for all eternity, or at least for as long as it lasts. It could be millennia. You will be free. Your spirit will be free after death. It's never developed that much, but I thought it was a really interesting concept. Like, Tolkien really poses the fact that to die is a gift. I don't know if he was trying to convey some kind of message. I mean, I think he was a Christian. I don't know how that influenced or colored his creation. But I mean, you could say there are pagan elements as well. There are influences from Germano-Scandinavian mythology and lore and Celtic lore as well. There are all these influences there. You can see them. But yeah, that we can die and leave this body and leave this earthly plane is a gift. How it is a gift exactly is never answered, but there you have it. There it is for you to ponder and reflect upon. Of course, it's something that is used to manipulate humans into falling prey to the dark side, because, like, the bad gods, Morgoth and then Sauron are like, yeah, but, dying, no, it's not good. It's an evil lure from the creator spirit. He's actually trying to trick you. No, you want to be immortal like the elves and like the gods. You want to stay on Earth, and we're going to show you how to do this and be bad people. Of course, some of the humans fall for that, right? And, well, I just mentioned this. The allure of power, ever present. The allure of greed for the elves in the Silmarillion, the allure of power for different human beings, or even different elves in the Silmarillion and The Hobbit, the Lord of the Rings. It's always there, isn't it? How it can corrupt your soul, whether you're elf, human, dwarf, even deity. Like I said, the deities are corruptible. The big bads are themselves deities. Right? Saruman, the wizard, is also a lesser deity. Everything can be corruptible. Everything that is good and pure and beautiful can be corrupted, can be soiled and tainted. And so you have to fight to preserve. I think that's also one of the central messages. You have to fight to preserve what is good, what is precious in the world. Always, you have to fight for it. I guess I like that about his mythology. Like, he was Christian, but I guess his own version of the big head god isn't too hands-on. He just like orchestrates this. That's kind of beautiful, actually, the song, the melody that creates the world. He's like the orchestra conductor of the music of the Ainur, which are the lesser deities that will create the world and make it take shape. He creates humans, he creates elves, like he gives the general picture of how to organize creation to the demiurges. After that, he's like, I'm done. But, I mean, even the lesser gods, they're like in Valinor chilling. They're not interacting. They're like, you people, you figure it out on your own. We tried to help you. We tried to give you warnings. You ignored us. That's on you. You made your bed, you lie in it. I mean, they do intervene in the Silmarillion at some point because they figure, okay, if we don't act now, they're toast. We got to do something to help those poor sods. But after that, you never see them again. They're like, dude, we're done. Another final lesser theme is the theme of inherited burdens. I guess this is complicated by the fact that the elves don't really die. They're immortal unless they're slain, but even actually when an elf is killed, I'm not really sure how that works actually. That's the tiny flaw in the world building. I guess the spirit goes back to Valinor in one of these purgatory-like gardens where your soul rests and regenerates, and then I guess your body regrows around it. But basically you're resurrected, I guess you could call it. So yeah, the elves don't die, but they do marry and have children, so there are successive generations of the Noldor that go to Beleriand, and there's this idea that even if they found cities, even if they flourish from a civilization point of view, from a technology point of view, and form trade routes and alliances and make beautiful things in nature, with jewels, with architecture, there's this duty to get the Silmarils back at all costs. However long it takes, however many generations it takes, we will get those bloody jewels back, because our father, then grandfather, then great-grandfather said, we need to get them back. It's a question of pride, of family pride, of bloodline pride. So there's this idea of, inheriting the burdens of your forefathers and carrying out this, it's not really a blood debt, but this feud, just continuing it beyond all necessity, because basically the founding Noldor, they swore like not a blood oath, but like a binding oath that come hell or high water, we will get those jewels back. Otherwise, strike us dead. I'm not really sure. I don't really remember the particulars of it, but they swear a binding oath that just ties them to this insane quest, because that's the point. It loses all sense. I mean, okay, Morgoth is bad, and you should get rid of him because he's the big bad evil guy, sure. But this hubris the elves have, or those elves have, to get those jewels back, it's like, but to what end, ultimately? So their light doesn't get soiled by Morgoth. Yeah, alright, but look at all the death it's causing, the destruction it's causing, the chaos it's causing. If you hadn't been so arrogant in the first place, it wouldn't have attracted Morgoth. You wouldn't have been susceptible to his corrupting influence in the first place, right? And yet now you've condemned your descendants to carry on this insane quest. And a lot of them die. A lot of them die, or killed, or slain in battle. And even some of the descendants, they're like chill, and then they form friendships with some human characters, but then one of the human characters actually gets his hand on a Silmaril, and the elves are like, we gotta get that jewel back. They're almost brainwashed. Like, it was all fun and games when we were buddies and good friends, but now you gotta give us that jewel back. And he's like, no, you will give us that jewel back. So yeah, just carrying this ancestral obsession, this idea of, generational burden, family burden, I don't know how to put it differently. So that was an interesting theme in the Silmarillion specifically. Well, you can kind of see it in the Lord of the Rings, like the idea of ancestry and what have your ancestors left you with. Like Aragorn is the descendant of the Númenórean kings of old. And you have the Gondorian line, and the stewards of Gondor also feel this responsibility because their ancestors have kept the seat warm for the king that's supposed to return. So the concept of family and family burdens, I think, is also an important one in Tolkien's work. Right, with all that being said, I will now read some quotes I found interesting from both the Silmarillion and the Lord of the Rings. Then Ilúvatar said to them, of the theme that I have declared to you, I will now that ye make in harmony together a great music. And since I have kindled you with a flame imperishable, ye shall show forth your powers in adoring this theme, each with his own thoughts and devices, if he will. But I will sit and hearken, and be glad that through you great beauty has been wakened into song. Long was he at work, and slow at first and barren was his labour. But he that sows lies in the end shall not lack of a harvest, and soon he may rest from toil indeed, while others reap and sow in his stead. Deserves it? I dare say he does. Many that live deserve death, and some that die deserve life. Can you give it to them? And do not be too eager to deal out death in judgment, for even the very wise cannot see all ends. All that is gold does not glitter, not all those who wander are lost. The old that is strong does not wither, deep roots are not reached by the frost. From the ashes a fire shall be woken, a light from the shadows shall spring, renewed shall be blade that was broken, the crownless again shall be king. And he that breaks a thing to find out what it is has left the path of wisdom. Ithilien, the garden of Gondor, now desolate, kept still a dishevelled, dried loveliness. He wondered what the man's name was and where he came from, and if he was really evil at heart, or what lies or threats had led him on the long march from his home, and if he would not really rather have stayed there in peace. And she answered, all your words are but to say you are a woman, and your part is in the house. When the men have died in battle and honour, you have leave to be burned in the house, for the men will need no more. But I am of the house of Eorl, and not a serving woman. I can ride and wield blade, and I do not fear either pain or death. And all the host laughed and wept, and in the midst of their merriment and tears the clear voice of the minstrel rose like silver and gold, and all men were hushed. And he sang to them, now in the elven tongue, now in the speech of the West, until their hearts, wounded with sweet words, overflowed, and their joy was like swords. And they passed in thought out to regions where pain and delight flow together, and tears are the very wine of blessedness. And that's kind of all I have to say about that. Those are my general thoughts about, I guess, the Tolkienverse and those books in particular. Like I said, it worked for me brilliantly in the Silmarillion, not so much in the Lord of the Rings. It's not a bad book at all. It's a classic of fantasy literature for a reason. It deserves to be acknowledged as a classic of fantasy literature. You can even say classic of English literature. Period, I think. The Tolkienverse is an amazing piece of art. It's a work of art. If for nothing else, then for the sheer act of creating a completely imaginary world, filled with peoples, history, races, plant species, fantastical creatures, well-established geography. Just for that, he deserves to be acknowledged as an amazing artist, an amazing creator. So no, Tolkien deserves his letters of nobility without any doubt. It's just that, the story itself of The Lord of the Rings as a novel as a written story just didn't work that well for me overall, but I recognize its place in the canon of literature and fantasy literature more specifically. I hope you found this more casual, more informal review interesting. Have you read The Lord of the Rings? Or, the Silmarillion, The Children of Hurin? Have you read, the published version of Baron Luthien and the Fall of Gondolin? What are those like? Please do share your thoughts down in the comments. In the meantime, I hope you will have a lovely day or evening, and I shall see you in the next video. Bye.